So today we're gonna be continuing coastal erosion, and actually we're gonna talk about coastal transportation instead. Okay, not coastal erosion. So we're gonna take a break from erosion and move on to coastal transportation for a bit. So just like coastal erosion, there's 4 types of coastal transportation. Firstly, though, what is coastal transportation? Coastal transportation is when sediment, like rocks, minerals, random pieces of sand, like stuff like that, from coastlines that are eroded away into the sea, move inside the sea, like move in the ocean from one place to another. Like you can imagine the rocks and sand floating in the waves, above the waves, and below the waves, and like all the way in the ocean, and the current just like brings them to like some random new coastline. So there's 4 types of coastal transportation. The first type is traction. So traction is when traction is basically when the large pieces of rock let me just write sediment for accuracy. Large pieces of sediment roll on the sea floor. The sea floor is made up of actual rock and sand, right? So the large pieces of sediment are too heavy to be picked up by the waves. So they usually just roll around. If there's a sudden strong wave, they roll around in the direction of the wave and on the sea floor. So these type of rocks move kind of slowly. And we also have saltation. My pen. Okay, saltation. We also have saltation. This is when not that large but medium-sized sediment bounces on the sea floor. So not just rolling. These pieces of sediment are light enough for the waves to carry them for 10 or 2 seconds, 2 to 10 seconds or something like that. And still, however, after that, the waves lose energy and they fall back onto the sea floor. So it's moving more faster. It's bouncing like that. So we're going in size order from largest rocks to largest sediments to smallest sediments. So we have suspension. Suspension is small sediment floating in the water. So the sediment basically floats in the water and it just follows the current. When the ocean moves in one direction, the sediment here suspended, as you can think of this suspension thing, floating in the sea water, and moves along with the current. So this type of coastal transportation actually moves along the sediment pretty fast. And the last type is solution. I know that there is also a solution for coastal erosion, where the sediment basically dissolves into nothingness over time because of the acidity of the seawater, right? The solution is pretty similar. It's basically dissolved particles, particles that are already dissolved. So you basically can't quite really see them. I guess you can feel the murkiness of the water, but you can't really see those particles or touch the particles. You can't get the particles out of the water. They're part of the water. So dissolved particles in the water, moving along with the water, moving along with the current. So let me just draw all of these types of coastal transportation out. So this just completely takes place in the ocean. We don't need a coastline for this. It's called coastal transportation because the sediment is essentially from coastlines, and the sediment will be deposited at other coastlines, which is the process we call coastal deposition. So we have the coastline here. Actually, I think this color is a bit too dark. Let me make it like light blue so we can actually draw rocks through this and actually see through it. Okay, so I'm trying my very best to fill this like entire page up pretty quickly. I'll just fill half a page up. And then now also a bit of coloring for the sea floor. So a bit of coloring for the sea floor, which okay, I'll just use gray. You know what? I'll just use gray. Just make it simple. Or I'll just use yellow for like the sand on the sea floor, right? Okay, let's just pretend the sea floor is all sand. So that's the sea floor and the blue part is the sea. So now we have these tiny pieces of sediment. So let me just first draw the traction part. For traction, these rocks are all lying on the sea floor. So this is traction. The rocks roll around so they can flip around. They can flip around like this if there is a sudden wave. Like if a wave suddenly comes through to this direction, then the rock will have enough energy, so the wave will have enough energy to push the rock over. And then another wave comes through, the rock will have enough energy again to move again. Like this. So they move like this. However, after some process of coastal erosion called attrition, where rocks bump into each other and they make each other smaller and smoother, these rocks will be small enough to get into the process of saltation, which I'll draw over here. So we have the process of saltation, where the rocks have enough, are small enough in size to bounce up, and down, and then bounce up again, and then bounce down again, like that. And then after some other attrition, or maybe even abrasion, where the rocks bump into the cliff face and they break down the cliff face, but they also break down themselves at the same time, the rocks will be small enough to be involved in a process called suspension, where the rocks are small enough that they're nearly invisible, but yes, you can still see them. So they're like floating in this current. They're all over the place. Some are on the seafloor, some are not. Some are moving in one direction, some are moving in the other. It's like when you drop something in the sea and it just washes away in a random direction. This is what happens. This is suspension. Okay, and then the last process is when the coastal erosion process of solution occurs, and the rocks are so the sediment dissolves until it is small enough to become part of the sea, and you basically can't really see them anymore. So I'm trying to draw this so you can still see it, but you basically can't really see that. The water just becomes like grayish blue. And this is like the process of solution in terms of coastal transportation. So this grayish blue water basically starts moving around and transporting the sediment all over the place. But the sediment can't really be separated from the water anymore. It's kind of like part of the water.